Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here with us, those of you that are here in our sanctuary, those who are joining from home. Unfortunately, members of the Baskin family were going to be with us, but there was a call for freezing ice, and then driving in from Toronto, they decided to caution themselves. So hopefully you're with us online as we gather together this evening to mark the Shloshim, the 1 month since the passing of our dear Rabbi Emeritus Bernard Baskin. You know, I've often believed that one of the things that our Jewish tradition does best is mourning. And there is, going back to our ancient sages, this understanding that grief unfolds over time and affects people each individually in many different ways. So by recognizing the week of Shiva, first week after passing, and then the Shloshim, the month, and then up to the first Yartzeit, the first year, we mark each of these different chapters in the journey of mourning, to be able to not only remember the one who has passed, but also to allow our own feelings to process through in a healthy way. And for Rabbi Baskin, his influence in this community was so broad, so wide, that not only are the actual mourners, the members of the Baskin family, but I think all of us, his congregants, his community, we all feel a profound loss. He was just such a large presence in so many of our lives. And so to be able to join together this evening to mark the Shloshim is just really important for all of us and gives us an opportunity to remember together somebody who had such a profound influence in all of our lives. So we're going to make our way through a short evening service, and then we have a couple very special guest speakers who will introduce at that time. And then we're going to conclude with some special memorial prayers. And then following that, we will move together to the Mandela Auditorium. We'll have some refreshments, and we'll have the opportunity to view a lot of photos from the life of Bernard Baskin. And also anybody who wishes will have the opportunity to share any of your own personal Baskin memories at that time. We're going to be using our Mishkan Tefillah for the House of Mourning. So if you don't have one, they're available by the entrance. This book, for some reason I never understood, is paginated a little bit differently. It's 4A, 4B, AB, but we'll announce the pages so we can all be together. We're going to begin on page 4A, and I invite everyone to please rise for the Baruch Hu.
Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Leolam Vaed.
Page 5A, Baruch Atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bidvaro ma'ariv aravim, v'chokhmah potech sha'arim uvidvuna mishanei itim, u'machalif et hazmanim, u'mesader et hakochavim b'mishmerotehem barakeh k'tzono, orei yom v'layla golel or mipnei choshech, v'choshech mipnei or, ma'avir yom u'mevi layla, mavdil ben yom u'vein layla, Adonai tzavaot shemo,
Baruch atah Adonai Hamariv Aravim. On page 6A. Ahavat Olam Beit Yisrael Amcha Ahavta Torah Mitzvot Chukim u'mishpatim Otanu limadeta Al kein Adonai Eloheinu בשוכבנו ובקומנו, נשיח בחוקיך, ונשמח בדברי תורתך, ובמצוותיך לעולם ועד. כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו, ובהם נגה יומם ולילה, ואהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני אוהב עמו ישראל. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. שם כבוד מלכותו לעולם ועד.
Please be seated.
ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך, ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך, ובלכתך בדרך, ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, וחיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות להם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת.
The middle of page 9b. There are times when each of us feels lost or alone, adrift and forsaken, unable to reach those next to us or to be reached by them. And there are days and nights when existence seems to lack all purpose and our lives seem brief sparks in an indifferent cosmos. Fear and loneliness enter the soul. None of us is immune from doubt and fear. None escapes times when all seems dark and senseless. And then, at the ebb tide of the Spirit, the soul cries out and reaches for companionship.
מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש, נורא תהילות עושה פלא. מלכותך ראו בניך, בוקי הים לפני משה ומרים. זה אלי אנו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. פני עמק אדוני את יעקב, וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו. ברוך אתה אדוני קהל ישראל.
On the top of page 11b, give us a place to rest, O God. Bring us into shelter in the soft, long evening shadows of your truth. For with you are true protection and safety, and in your presence is gentle love. Watch over us as we go forth. Prepare for us as we return. Spread over us your shelter of peace, over all we love, over Jerusalem. Blessed are you, Adonai, guardian of Israel.
Baruch atah Adonai, shomer mo Yisrael la'ad.
On page 12a, we invite you to rise as we continue with the Chatzi Kaddish and then continuing directly into the Tefillah.
Yitgadal ve'yitgadash shemei Rabba, be'alma divrach yeruteh v'yamlik malchuteh, b'chayechon uv'yomechon, uv'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, ba'agala, agala uv'yizman karib ve'imeru, Amen. Yehi shmei Rabba mevorach, le'alam olal me'almaya, yitbarak ve'yishtabach, v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam ve'yitnaseh, ve'yithadar ve'yitale ve'yitalal, shemei dekudesha barichu, le'elam min kol birchata ve'shirata, toshbechata ve'nechemata, damiran be'alma ve'imeru. Amen. Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi agi tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu ve'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, v'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, El Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'Konei Hakol, V'Zocher Hasdei Avot ve'imachot, U'mevii geula livnei v'neihem, Lema'an shemo be'ahava, Melech Ozer u'Moshiach u'Magen. Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham, Be'ezrat Sarah. Atah gibor le'olam Adonai, B'chayei hakol atarav lechoshia, Mashiv haruach komorid hagashem. Mechalkel chayim bechesed, B'chayei hakol berachamim rabim, Somech noflim ve'rofei cholim, Umatir hasurim, Umekayem emunato, Lishenei afar, Michamocha ba'al gevurot, Umidom elach, Melech memit u'mechaye, u'matzmiach Yeshua, v'ne'amanat ha'chayot hakol. Baruch atah Adonai, mechaye hakol. Atah kadosh v'shimcha kadosh, Ukdoshim b'chol yom yechalucha selah. Baruch atah Adonai ha'el hakadosh.
Friends, the Emsaot, the intermediary prayers for a weekday evening service, continue between pages 18 and 25. On the right-hand side, you'll find the Hebrew and an English translation. On the left-hand side of the pages, you'll find some alternative readings and prayers and meditations. I'm going to invite everyone to make their way through these pages, 18 to 25, on your own, either in the Hebrew, the English, the alternative readings, or if you prefer, just to take this opportunity for some silent personal prayer. And when you are ready, you're welcome to just have a seat.
עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru Amen.
We're going to conclude our formal prayers this evening on page 26A with the Aleinu. And again, if you are able, I invite you to please rise.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצא בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוררים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא, ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
Please be seated. I think regardless of what capacity one knew Rabbi Baskin, whether it was in the community, many of the organizations that he was involved with, whether it was here at the temple, one of the things you knew right away about this man was that he lived in the realm of words and of books. I mean, it was really the continuing thread. And as I mentioned in my words at his funeral, he once told me that he really should have been an English professor, but his father wasn't happy about that idea, so he became a rabbi instead. And it is extraordinary when you think about for how long he wrote articles in the Hamilton Spectator and the Canadian Jewish News, certainly all the writing he did here at the temple. And yet, you know, and for somebody whose life was so associated with books, he never had written a book of his own. So it was a great honor for myself and Ginny Levine and Steve Arnold, Zichron Levacha, and the Baskin family to be involved with editing in 2 collections of his writings over the years into the 2 volumes of the Essential Bernard Baskin. And I know that having a book in his own name was something which he took great pride. And he continues to speak to all of us through those books, and they are available. If you're interested, you can contact the temple office. We were really pleased that we received permissions from the Hamilton Spectator and from the Canadian Jewish News to be able to include many of the writings he did for them. And I know that Rabbi Baskin really cherished his relationships that he had through these periodicals and the relationships that he had with McMaster University and the library and the archives there. These were very dear to him. And so this evening, we have a number of special guest speakers to share with us about their experience and their relationship with Rabbi Baskin in those capacities. So I'm very pleased to invite to the bima, to the podium, first Dana Robbins. Dana was previously the publisher of the Hamilton Spectator and currently serves as vice president of Metroland Media, worked very closely with Rabbi Baskin, and I know they became quite good friends. So please, we welcome Dana Robbins.
Thank you, Rabbi. Good evening, everyone. My son and I are deeply appreciative of being here with you this evening to partake in this celebration of Rabbi Bernard Baskin. The rabbi, of course, was a spiritual leader who obviously had a larger-than-life influence on this temple and the people who worship here. But he was also a Hamiltonian who had a larger-than-life influence on the city in which he made his home. And tonight, I want to talk to you about the fact that he was a friend who had a larger-than-life influence on me personally. To truly understand how outsized, how exaggerated an influence Bernie Baskin had on my life, I need to relate to you an exchange that happened between myself and a coworker. This happened several years ago. We had been in a very lengthy and tedious business meeting for a number of hours. And at the end of the meeting, as we were preparing to part company, my coworker, someone I'd worked with for years and who I knew very well, leaned in and took my hand in his and said with great enthusiasm and warmth, "Dana, happy Passover to you and your family." That gave me pause because I knew my colleague wasn't Jewish. So I said, "David, why are you wishing me happy Passover?" He said, "Well, because you're Jewish." And I said, "No, David, I'm not Jewish." To which he responded with considerable confidence, "Yes, you are." Now, I had reached an age, even at that point, when memory is not always a reliable ally for me. But I was pretty sure I wasn't Jewish. And though it seemed an unseemly point to argue with a colleague, I did push back ever so gently. And I said, "David, I'm not Jewish." "Then why," David persisted, "are you always quoting your rabbi?" A fair point. Newspaper folks in general, and I would say maybe me specifically, are not easily impressed. I have met very few people in my 60+ years on the planet who I would feel comfortable describing as a great man. Rabbi Baskin was a great man. And more specifically, he was a man made great by both his wisdom and by his decency. And yes, my colleague, as he astutely observed, many times in my life, I have quoted the wisdom of Bernard Baskin. And I suspect it's something I will do however many years I have left ahead of me. In this, I'm not alone. Rabbi Baskin made a career of being wise, although he was always the first to deflect that kind of praise. I came across this clipping when I was preparing my remarks tonight. This is what Rabbi Baskin told the Spectator's John Wells in 2012. He said, "You have to be careful about attributing wisdom to anybody. Given the breadth of knowledge and how little I really know about so many things, I would hesitate to use that kind of appellation. Wisdom is how you use knowledge effectively, the rabbi continued. Knowledge builds weapons. Wisdom is how we use them. That is such a deliciously perfect Rabbi Baskin moment. Even as he's downplaying his own wisdom, he's sharing wisdom with us. In my experience, the rabbi seemed to draw wisdom from a bottomless well fed by an inexhaustible stream. And he dispensed it like a libation, with reverence and grace, always with kindness and humanity, and many times with tremendous wit. I've told this story many, many times in my life. My wife assures me I've told all my stories many, many times in my life. And undoubtedly that is true. If you were fortunate enough to attend the 60th anniversary of Bernie's rabbinate in 2008, you have heard this story before. So my apologies for plagiarizing myself. This particular tale starts on an unseasonably hot and humid day in Hamilton. Rabbi Baskin and I are to have lunch. This is an occasion for me. As is his custom, Bernie refuses my offer to pick him up at his home. Nor is he content to meet me at the restaurant. Instead, as he always insists with every one of our lunches, he insists on trudging to my office on the 3rd floor of the Spectator's cavernous newsroom. At exactly the appointed hour, Bernie is outside my office door. Immediately, we are deep in conversation and remain so as we walk the considerable span of the newsroom, which is literally, if you have not visited, this length of a football field. Down 3 flights of stairs and out into the Specs parking lot. Bernie, of course, is impeccably turned out. Neatly pressed slacks, dress shirt, sports coat. Truthfully, I don't recall if he was wearing a tie, but if he was, I'm confident telling you that it was perfectly knotted. In short, the rabbi cuts quite the figure, and he is seemingly indifferent or oblivious to the scorching blast furnace heat that greets us when we step out the front door. I'll take this opportunity to remind you all that as this story is unfolding, Rabbi Baskin is on the cusp of his 9th decade on the planet. We set out across the gravel parking lot, which is also the length of another football field, talking the whole way. But when we arrive at the far end, the spot where I normally park my car, it's not there. I'm confused, but loath to admit it. The rabbi's opinion of me mattered greatly, and I didn't want to tell the good man I didn't know where my car was. So I gently grabbed his elbow and turned him, hoping what I'm sure at this point is my innate chatter is covering the fact that I've lost my car. And we're now trudging back across the same broad expanse of gravel parking lot. I am freely perspiring, whether from the heat or from mortification, I'm not sure, but inside my suit, my shirt is dissolving. Irritatingly, Bernie still looks like he's just stepped off the cover of GQ. Then more humiliation. We reach the far side of the parking lot, back where we started, and I still can't see my car. Confused, but now defeated, I turn to Bernie. Rabbi, I stammer, I am so sorry. This is so embarrassing. I can't remember where I parked my car. My octogenarian friend, seemingly unruffled, by our desert trek and betraying not even the slightest trace of exertion, leans in solicitously and confides, "Dana, don't worry. Sometimes I forget things too." How could you possibly not love a man with such easy grace? How could you not love a man with such easy grace? I can't honestly tell you how soon after my arrival in Hamilton as a young reporter, straight out of journalism school and heading for an internship at the Hamilton Spectator, that I first heard Bernard Baskin's name. Nor could I tell you with any certainty when I first met the rabbi in person or heard him speak in public. I'm convinced my memory fails me on these points because Bernie Baskin was so indelibly woven into the fabric of the community. He was always part of the narrative. It seemed to many of us that he'd forever been part of Hamilton's cultural and intellectual and spiritual fabric, and that he always would be. Certainly it seemed that way to me. How else to explain that when the news of the rabbi's death reached me, I was shocked. I was truly shocked. How is it possible to be shocked by the passing of a man who's 102 years old? But that's exactly how so many of us felt. At Bernie's funeral service, I heard one after another person say that they were shocked by his passing. I think we were all convinced he would be with us forever. When I consider the trajectory of my relationship with Rabbi Baskin, it's perhaps not surprising that he was the very first person in the community whose counsel I called upon when I was appointed editor-in-chief of the Spectator. He was a man whose common sense, wisdom, and decency I had already come to understand and trust. In the many years in which I was the Spectator's editor-in-chief and then subsequently its publisher, Bernie and I would meet regularly for lunch, and for me, more importantly, for conversation. Frankly, the chats were my very transparent ploy to plumb a superior intellect and enjoy the gentle, always dry humor of a meticulous observer of the human condition. I was on occasion the target of that dry wit. At some point early in our friendship, I confessed to the rabbi that I had converted to Catholicism as an adult, but it had never quite taken. This was a point of some consternation for me. I learned in the fullness of time that my Protestant/agnostic upbringing had provided too thin a soil for Catholic roots to grow. At every lunch after that confession, the rabbi would make a point of educating me on some arcane point of Catholic theology, or relate the usually tragic and grisly tale of some saint from the Dark Ages. And at some point during his erudite recitation and with a clockwork predictability, the rabbi would cock an accusing eye at me. I'm surprised, he'd say, that as a Catholic you don't already know this. Those lunches were my Tuesdays with Maury, and I grew to appreciate and anticipate them more than anything else in my calendar. I've often smiled in the years since at the thought of what an unlikely pair we must have made as we trudged into whatever restaurant we were dining in. This 80-something-year-old, distinguished, thoughtful, always impeccably turned out scholar, and the rumpled, unlettered, uncouth journalist a full generation removed. The latter not always quick to appreciate that when the rabbi quoted Homer, he didn't mean Simpson. But what conversations we had. To chat with Bernie Baskin was to sup at a finely laid table. If there was a better more thoughtful raconteur, I've never met them. From the profound to the pedestrian, there was little ground that we did not cover over those many, many lunches. Politics, religion, literature were almost always on the menu. But so too was friendship and family and marriage. And over time, I came to appreciate Bernie's unshakable belief in family. And I came to understand his own great affection for his family. And I came to understand the immeasurable sources of pride that were his children, Judith and David and Susan, and then later his grandchildren. You all know the rabbi was not a boastful man, certainly not a braggart, but I don't recall ever a single exchange with Bernie that did not include at least one prideful, loving observation about his children and his grandchildren. To Judith, David, and Susan, and all the grandchildren, I hope you take comfort by knowing how proud the rabbi was of his family. If familial devotion was a trait of the rabbi, so too was his great tolerance for the foibles of our species. In conversation, it was impossible to not be struck by how reluctant Rabbi Baskin was to sit in judgment of others. His was a great intellect, informed by great empathy. I've often thought this is why Spectator readers responded so warmly and with such obvious affection to the rabbi. They recognized in him a man of great wisdom, certainly, but they also recognized the compassion that was at the heart of this man. This is what one reader wrote after the rabbi's passing. Rabbi Baskin's columns were full of wisdom, often affecting me spiritually. In our world, especially today, we need more humans like Rabbi Baskin guiding us on our daily journey. And what a guide he was. Think how different Hamilton might be if we had not had his wisdom in the days immediately following 9/11 and the arson attack on the Hindu Samaj temple. Think what a calming voice the rabbi was during those terrible days. Think how different our path had been if Bernie had not been so passionate about advancing interfaith dialogue in our community. If he had not been such a relentless participant in important conversations about everything from nuclear disarmament to racial equity. Of course, Bernie's great contributions to our public life were long ago recognized, and the awards and honors and accolades flowed. Hamilton Gallery of Distinction, B'nai B'rith, Humanitarian Award, and honorary university degree, to name but 3. But tonight, in my final time with you, I'd like to make the case that as great as the rabbi's contributions were to the big issues of the day, he made a still greater contribution in the lives of untold thousands of ordinary Hamiltonians, some of whom absorbed his words from these very pews, others who read him in the Hamilton Spectator or the Canadian Jewish News. People the rabbi never met, but people who learned something about life, about humanity, and about themselves from listening to this great man. Last week, we were discussing this evening's service over the family dinner table, and my son Jacob, who I'm about to mortify, he's with us tonight, surprised me. I was talking about Rabbi Baskin, and he said, well, you know, I've had one of Rabbi Baskin's clippings pinned to my bedroom wall for years. I was nonplussed, mostly because I was certain he had nothing written by his father pinned to his wall. but I was fascinated. Now, I'm not going to say I tried to call his bluff, but I think I looked skeptical. And so Jacob disappeared from the table and went to his bedroom and came back, and he was holding a yellowed, curled clipping from the Hamilton Spectator, an article in which Rabbi Baskin had written on the nature of kindness. This was a lesson he taught my son, whom he never met. We live in an age debased by celebrity, and what passes for wisdom is often not. But in Bernie Baskin, this temple, this congregation, Spectator readers, and the community at large had the real thing. I listened to a podcast recently in which the great American music producer Rick Rubin reflected on the nature of faith. What you believe in doesn't have to be true to be powerful, he said. There is power in simply believing. There is power in simply believing. Rabbi Baskin believed in people. He believed in our common humanity. That was his North Star. And by believing in people, by believing in our humanity, Bernie wielded amazing power. One of my last lunches with the rabbi happened to coincide with a particularly difficult period in my personal life, a time of significant pain. I am an intensely private person, but I took the liberty of unburdening myself to Bernie, something I was not wont to do. I was worried that the rabbi would be shocked, that perhaps he'd be embarrassed or maybe uncomfortable. Instead, he leaned in and he listened attentively. And when I was done, he paused a moment and then he spoke. And now it was my turn to listen, as his gentle voice shared the wisdom the rabbi thought I would need to navigate the journey that I was on. Now, here's the truly remarkable thing about Bernie. Truthfully, I don't remember the words he shared with me that day, but I do remember their impact. I remember a sense of calm settling over me as the rabbi spoke. I remember becoming hopeful as I listened to his measured words. And when he sat back, I felt peace. When we left that restaurant, I felt confident I could overcome what lay ahead. Such an amazing power. A power rooted in his faith in people. We have lost a great man. It seems fitting that the final words that I'll leave you with this evening are Rabbi Baskin's. These are two separate quotations, two distinct and seemingly unrelated nuggets of wisdom that he shared with Spectator readers years apart. But to my ear, tonight it feels appropriate to put them together and to share them with you. The first: unwisely, some mourners withdraw into a realm of exaggerated grief and excessive mourning. They wrap around themselves the gloomy garments of extended sorrow rather than face the truth that life must go on. And the second: so many of us walk with hidden terrors and suppressed fears, unable to bring them to the light of day. A man's best friend ought not to be his dog. It ought to be another human being. More than we realize, we need each other. Thank you. Condolences to all.
Thank you, Dana, for sharing those beautiful words, those beautiful memories. so well encapsulate who Rabbi Baskin was. But I have to tell you one thing. A number of years ago on the High Holy Days, Rabbi Baskin gave a sermon about efforts he was engaging in to try and relate better to his grandchildren. And in that sermon, he quoted the Spice Girls, he quoted Madonna, and yes, he quoted Homer Simpson. So he was very well-rounded in that regard. Rabbi Baskin's relationship with McMaster University and so many different people there goes back, well, as long as his history does in Hamilton. And of course, with the libraries and the archives, he shared much over the years. And so now it is my pleasure to welcome to the Bima and to invite to speak to us Vivian Lewis, who is the head librarian at McMaster University. Vivian.
Good evening, Rabbi Cohen, the distinguished guests, family, friends. Before I begin, I do wish to extend my condolences to the rabbi's family, Dr. Judith Baskin and her husband, Dr. Warren Ginsberg, to David Baskin and David's wife, Joan Garson, and to Susan Baskin and Susan's husband, Jack McKay. Also to the rabbi's many grandchildren and great-grandchildren, to his many friends and colleagues, and to you, his spiritual family. I'm truly honored to be asked to share some brief memories of the rabbi on this 30th day of mourning. And I do bring greetings from McMaster University and from our president and vice chancellor, Dr. David Farrar. But I speak to you this evening not simply as McMaster's University librarian, but as a neighbor and as a member of the Hamilton community, the community that the rabbi served with so much passion and so much commitment over 60 years. But I speak with trepidation, the thought of standing before you this evening, speaking about one of Hamilton's most skilled orators, is to say the least humbling. I grew up in a Catholic household here in the Hamilton area. And I have clear memories of reading the rabbi's various essays and letters in the Hamilton Spectator and talking with my parents about them around the kitchen table. The rabbi wrote on some of the most challenging social issues of the time, issues that were giving me tremendous pause as a young person, and issues that did not always have easy answers in the Catholic tradition. And I recall being moved by the clarity and the openness of his thinking. He espoused a very strong sense of social justice long before the term gained prominence. And I do recall him being very present in the community as I was growing up. And much has been written about his extraordinary life of civic engagement, that he and his wife Marjorie actively supported many of Hamilton's most crucial social service agencies, and that he sat on the boards of McMaster University, the Art Gallery of Hamilton, the Hamilton Public Library. And he was, of course, recognized for this record, as we have heard. But it was his comfortable presence in the houses of worship of all faiths that comes most vividly to mind for me. He came to Hamilton at a time when Catholic, Protestant, and Jewish people led very separate lives. Certainly that was the case when I was growing up. He brought rabbis and ministers and priests and their congregations together in ways that previously seemed frankly unimaginable. I note his comment in a 2015 article in the Hamilton Jewish News. When asked about his single greatest achievement, he said it was bringing the message of Judaism to a larger community. When I stepped into the role of McMaster's University librarian, I did just the same thing that Dana did. I reached out to the rabbi. I reached out to him not only because of his ongoing engagement with the university, having received an honorary doctorate in 1969 and having served on the board of governors for many years. I reached out to him because he was a lover of books and art, the things that any good university librarian cares deeply about. Over the years, the rabbi has donated over 1,500 of his most rare and valuable books to McMaster University Library, with the oldest book dating back to 1571. The collection includes a significant amount of Judaica, but in keeping with the rabbi's own broad tastes, also includes a wide range of history and politics, classics, literature, math, and science. Many are uncommon, but all are unique, having once been part of the great Baskin Library. Just a few years ago, the rabbi donated a complete set of Bernard and Picard's Religious Ceremonies of the World, a stunning and lavishly illustrated 11-volume work that represents a first foray into what we would today recognize as comparative religion. McMaster is one of the few, if not the only location where these books are available for public study. And in accordance with the rabbi's wishes, we hold these works in trust for humankind. The rabbi also donated 225 extraordinary works of art to the McMaster Museum of Art, and 208 of those valued pieces were created by his brother, the American sculptor, printmaker, and private press editor, Leonard Baskin. My memories of the rabbi are admittedly shaped around our shared love of the written word. The rabbi was, we all know, an assiduous book collector, a voracious reader who led book talks wherever he went in Canada and the United States. For years, he was the proprietor of an antiquarian bookselling firm specializing in Judaica, typography, and illustrated works. He owned so many books that he needed to have compact shelving installed in his own home. As a librarian, I'm very impressed by that. But to be clear, books were more than the physical objects or a passing fascination for the rabbi. As one biography noted some years ago, they represented a way of life mirroring the wonder and complexity of the human condition. He was deeply interested in the life of the book, the future of libraries and galleries, of bookstores and book collecting, as a reflection of the human spirit. But getting to know the rabbi has been one of the great highlights of my professional career. Over the years, I visited the rabbi several times in the old Binkley carriage house, the same house he lived in for 60 years. And visiting that house, and I'm sure many of you have had the same experience, was like visiting a great library and a great art gallery at the same time. We would travel through the various rooms, reflecting on some of the extraordinary books he had assembled over his long career. And we would pause at each piece of art on his walls, many of them by his brother Leonard. We enjoyed some wonderful lunches, so it's obvious that the rabbi had a lot of lunches. Given the pandemic, I paid just one memorable visit to the rabbi in his residence in Toronto. And we spent a delightful afternoon talking about the three things he loved so dearly: books, art, and people. And I looked forward to those visits more than I can say. He was articulate, he was sharp-witted, he was unbelievably wise, and even in his last years, had a razor-sharp understanding of world geopolitics. I learned very early on that the conversation could move from religion and morality to the current state of the Hamilton economy to the latest literary triumph in the blink of an eye. He was a truly brilliant man and one who made others feel smart in his presence. I recall one conversation some years ago, shortly after The Guardian published an article titled 10 Books That Changed the World. The rabbi delivered a public lecture documenting his own list of 10 world-altering books. And he shared some of his opinions with me and then expressed great curiosity about my own top 10 list. But the point of the conversation was not to judge my choices or to assert his own superior intellect, both of which would have been reasonable conclusions. He simply loved to engage in passionate conversation about the life of the mind. And as we've heard from the previous speaker, he had a wonderful, very wry sense of humor. I would invariably come back from my visits with the rabbi with one or two remarks that made me chuckle for days. I recall one conversation I had with him about a decade ago when he was in his early 90s, concerning his intention to shorten his annual trips to Florida. I foolishly thought that perhaps his health was becoming a bit of an issue, but he told me no. He just found that everyone in Florida was getting extremely old. He was 90 at the time. Back in 2014, the University Library and the McMaster Museum of Art band together to host an event celebrating the rabbi's work and life, as well as that of his brother Leonard. We called the event The Art of the Book, and he was so excited about the opportunity to speak about his life as a book collector. But then, as luck would have it, fell ill, so he could not participate. And his son David so generously stepped into his shoes. He read from his father's meticulously rendered remarks with a cadence somewhat similar to the original, but with some wonderful interjections of his own personal experience growing up as the son of a book collector. We gave David a very positive review when his father asked. But the rabbi brought a humility, a civility, and an authentic interest in the lives of others to every conversation. He took a studied interest in my work at the university, and he used a clever form of Socratic questioning to lead me in directions. He would ponder in a very deliberate way, how can you help the university enhance its relationship with the community through the cultural record? How can you help students be better world citizens by putting the right book in their hands at the right time? The rabbi lived through some of the world's darkest times, and he had seen humanity at its worst, but he still chose to see God and goodness in others. On my last visit with him, I bemoaned the challenges brought upon by the pandemic. He acknowledged those hardships, but also saw the opportunities to rethink practices and relationships. He spoke at great length about the value of books and libraries during the most challenging times in history. He counseled me to plan for new and better times ahead. I know that he corresponded and supported many other people throughout the community, but he always made me feel that his support for my work was special. He would sign his messages from one of your faithful fans. We all need faithful fans. In close, in preparing for these remarks, I reread the interview Steve Paikin did of the rabbi last year. And the rabbi said, the purpose of life is to be useful, to be honorable. It is to be compassionate. It is to matter. It is to make some difference. By that yardstick, it's very clear that the rabbi led a singular life. He was useful, he was honorable, he was compassionate. I'll miss him dearly. Thank you.
Vivian, thank you for sharing those beautiful words and memories. And I think hearing both of you inspires all of us to really consider the nature of our relationships. And you know, the remarkable thing about Rabbi Baskin is, and you both said it, you know, when you were there with him, he made you feel like you were just the most important person in the world at that moment. And that truly is a gift. So, Zecher Tzadich Livracha. May the memory of the righteous be for all of us as an abiding blessing. May the memory of Rabbi Bernard Baskin be for all of us who knew him, for all of us who were inspired by him. May his memory always be an eternal blessing. Amen. Friends, we're going to conclude our time here in the sanctuary with some memorial readings and prayers beginning on page 28A. And I'd like to invite Laura Wilson to come forward for the chanting of Psalm 23.
Mizmor leDavid, Adonai ro'i lo esar, binot Hashem yarbitzeni, al mei menuchot yenachaleni. Nafshi eshovein, nafshi eshovein, yanchini lemagle tzedek leman shemo. Nam kilech begit salmavet, lo irara, ki ata imadi, shivtecha umishantecha, shivtecha umishantecha, ema yenachamuni. Taroch lefanai shulchan neged tzorerai, tishanta Hashem en roshi kosi revaya. Achtov v'chesed yirdefuni kol yemei chayai, v'shavti b'veit Adonai, v'shavti b'veit Adonai, le'orech yamim.
On page 30A, Ana Adonai harofer al shvorei lev, m'chabesh latzvatam shalem nechumim avelim. O God, healer of the brokenhearted and binder of their wounds, grant consolation to those who mourn. Give them strength and courage in their time of grief, and restore to them a sense of life's goodness. Fill them with reverence and love, that they may serve you with a full heart, and let them know peace. Amen. On page 32B, Birth is a beginning, and death a destination. And life is a journey from childhood to maturity, youth to age, from innocence to awareness and ignorance to knowing, from foolishness to discretion, and then perhaps to wisdom, from weakness to strength or strength to weakness, and often back again, from health to sickness, and back, we pray, to health again, from offense to forgiveness, from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, from pain to compassion, and grief to understanding, from fear to faith, from defeat to defeat to defeat, until looking backward or ahead, we see that victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made the journey, stage by stage, a sacred pilgrimage. Birth is a beginning and death a destination, but life is a journey from birth to death to life everlasting. On page 33A, if you're able, we invite you to please rise for the recitation of El Molei Rachamim.
El Molei Rachamim, Shochen Bamramim, Hamsei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei HaShechina, Im Kedoshim Utechorim, Kezohar Harakia, Mazhirim. Et nishmat Morenu Harav Benyamin Ben Harav Shmuel Miriam Shechalak Leolamo Baal Harachamim Yastirecho Beseter Kanafav Leolamim Veyitzror Bitzror HaChaim Et Nishmato Adonai Hu Nachalato Ve'yanuach Shalom Al Mishkavo V'nomar Amen.
God, full of compassion, you dwell in the heights and in the depths. Grant perfect rest under the wings of your presence to Morenu Harav and Yamim ben Harav Shmuel Miriam, to our teacher and Rabbi Bernard Benjamin Baskin, our loved one who has entered eternity. Let him find refuge forever in the shadow of your wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. For you, the everlasting God, are his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And we say together, Amen. Eternal God, you are close to the hearts of the sorrowing. You strengthen and console them with the warmth of your love and with the assurance that the human spirit is enduring and indestructible. Even as we pray for perfect peace for those whose lives have ended, so do we ask you to give comfort and courage to the living. In knowledge of your nearness be our strength, O God, for you are with us at all times, in joy and sorrow, in light and darkness, in life and in death. We continue now on page 34A with the Kaddish Yatom, the Mourner's Kaddish. Yit Gadal v'yit Kadash Shemei Rabbah, v'yalmad divrach Yerutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chai echon v'yom echon, v'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael, Bargala v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehi shmei rabba mevarach le'olam omei omaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei dekudisha b'rechu. La'ela mikol birchata v'shirata. Tush b'chata v'nechamata. Damiran v'yoma v'imru amen. Yehi shlomo rabba mishamaya. V'chaim aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael. V'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav. V'yaseh shalom aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael. V'imru amen. The source of peace, send peace to all those who mourn, and comfort to all those who are bereaved among us. And we say together, amen. And to the mourners, to the members of the Baskin family who are here with us this evening online, we say to you the traditional words of consolation. May God comfort you amongst all the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. Amen. Friends, thank you all for being with us. We're going to continue now in the Mandel Auditorium. There's some refreshments available, and we'll sort of have an open mic for anybody that wants to share your own memories or stories. I want to thank Dana Robbins and Vivian Lewis for your words this evening, Laura Wolfson for sharing your voice with us, Cantor Baruch, of course, and please join us together in the Mandel Auditorium.
Good evening, everyone. I've got a few submissions from folks. Most importantly, I think, from Susan Baskin on behalf of the Baskin family. And she asked if I would read this evening to everyone here. She writes, "Thank you, Rabbi Cohen Canterbury, for allowing me to share a few words this evening. Dearest clergy and members and friends of Temple Anshe Sholom, I'm very sorry that my siblings and I are unable to join you in person this evening. As you all know, our dear father was devoted to Temple Anshe Sholom. For almost 70 years, he served his beloved congregation. He cared deeply for his congregants and for the wider Hamilton community as well. Even over the last 5 years, when he was living in Toronto and was unable to return to Hamilton, especially over the last 2.5 years, Temple Anshe Sholom was always in his thoughts, and he was always eager to find out what was going on and was always concerned about the well-being of the congregation. In a recent conversation with Cantor Baruch, Dad learned that 50 new families had joined the temple. He was so pleased, and he brought the fact up continually in his last days. On behalf of Judith, David, and myself, I want to thank you for the decades of love and respect this congregation has extended to our Father. Thank you, too, for the support given to our family over the last 30 days. We are deeply appreciative of your kind wishes. Thank you for the many memories you have shared of our dear father through emails, cards, and letters. We look forward to watching the recording of tributes tonight and photos that are being presented this evening. Many thanks to Rabbi Cohen and Cantor Paula, this evening's speakers, and to the organizing committee and sponsors for the beautiful Shloshim tribute to our dear father and your devoted spiritual leader, Rabbi Bernard Baskin, from Susan Baskin and the Baskin family. On our website, there was a place to submit tributes, and we did receive some. I'd like to share those tonight. From Lucio Palazzo. I met Rabbi Baskin at a Rotary meeting. I invited him to lunch. We met at the temple and walked to Valentino's, where he had Italian wedding soup and a salad. This turned into a number of monthly lunches at the beach tonight, where he shared his thoughts and ideas on many subjects. I know how privileged I was and grateful that he made time in his busy schedule. Thank you, Rabbi. You will be greatly missed. From Belinda Kligman Tisnauer. I have fond memories of Rabbi Baskin from both my young childhood, attending temple for services and religious school. He always exemplified and expected decorum out of everyone, adults and child alike. I also witnessed, along with my mom and brother, Rabbi's special personal connection he had with my late father, Jack Kligman. When my dad was in life-threatening condition in hospital, Rabbi came to support us and my grandparents, and he was almost more affected than we were. He was always the most caring and genuine man. From Roseberry Baptista, I had the privilege, blessing, and honor to be Rabbi Baskin's neighbor. I would run into him numerous times during his daily walks. We'll always remember his positive, inspiring, and motivating nature. He was well liked and admired by all his neighbors and McMaster University students living in the neighborhood. Rest in peace, Rabbi Baskin. From Deborah Yanover. As a young child, I remember Rabbi Baskin solely as the rabbi on the bima. My impressions as a young child was simply a reserved man talking from a distance. As an adult returning to Hamilton for a visit, I got to know the man, Bernard Baskin, as he welcomed me into his home, shared his wonderful art collection, stories from his life, and a cup of tea. I'm so thankful that I took the time to reach out and connect. And from Todd Levy, Rabbi Baskin was such an integral part of my own and my family's life as both a friend and a mentor. He developed a close relationship with my late grandfather, Irwin Lyons, while he was the president of the synagogue, and with my late father, Louis Levy, while he served as principal of the Sunday school and then on the board of the synagogue. The rabbi officiated at my sister, Sue Ann's bat mitzvah, and at my bar mitzvah, and then co-officiated at my wedding. During my years at Temple Anshe Sholom Sunday School, I used every opportunity to not attend class until the confirmation year, which the rabbi personally taught. I found his teachings so educational and inspirational that I wouldn't consider missing a class. Having missed officiating at my parents' wedding since they eloped, he made up for it by officiating at the renewal of their vows on their 50th wedding anniversary. I had the good fortune to reconnect with him in his final years at the Russell Hill retirement home, where he lived next door to my mother, Judy Levy. He was so proud to invite me into his apartment to show off his extensive library and art collection. I feel so blessed to have such fond memories of him. He will be greatly missed. And from Janet Wise, is Janet here? No? Well, I wonder, oh, there you are. Do you want to read your own? From Janet. Rabbi Baskin was an amazing rabbi, educator, communicator, collaborator, and storyteller. Our community was exceptionally lucky to have been enriched by his generosity of wisdom and spirit. I'll never forget when Rabbi Baskin received an honorary doctorate from McMaster University. My dad congratulated him and called him Dr. Baskin. He quickly corrected my dad and indicated he wished to be referred to as Rabbi Baskin. In his own words, anyone can be a doctor. And we would all agree there was only one Rabbi Baskin. He will be missed, but his memory will live on through us all. Friends, if there's anyone here tonight that would like to come to the microphone to share an anecdote or a memory, we welcome you.
Well, for those of you that don't know me, my name is, whoops, is that better? For those of you that don't know me, my name is Marcia Baskin. Marcia Brandis. I'm a little, I was one of the first kindergarten students at the new Temple Anshe Sholom here. And from the day I started Sunday school, I was absolutely terrified of Rabbi Baskin. When I first came, I thought maybe he was the God that everybody talked about, but he was here at the temple. But when I was 12, I took drama lessons from a woman named Winifred Johnson, who was familiar with Rabbi Baskin. And all the students had to choose someone that they knew to imitate. Well, for my little drama report card, I chose Rabbi Baskin. And then about 5 decades later, when the synagogue had a fundraiser, I did stand up and I did the same imitation. And I still remember those 3 puffs of air he would take and how he would repeat things twice and then do a clap twice. But no matter, even if he was reading the ingredients of the Campbell's soup can, everything sounded brilliant when he said it. And I still remember he'd say, "Good Sabbath to you all." He was talking to God, and then he'd repeat twice, "Your prayer book is under the seat." Yes. Your prayer book is under the seat. I don't know what that was all about, but as I said, I sort of perfected it and did it twice. One of the other memories I had was in the confirmation year, and to say I was an average student would be complimenting my abilities. And Sunday school I thought was a thrill. It was somewhere that I went Sunday morning before my parents picked me up and took me to Shloshim Service for corned beef after, and you know that's what Sunday morning was. I didn't study, I didn't do the assignments, and he gave us a word and said he wanted our opinion on it the next week. Well, I'm sure he knew that I, above all else, was pretending with my friend Cynthia Sauter that I was conducting a survey, and which time I called the people I was madly in love with, Sam Robinson and David Bacon, pretend I was conducting a survey as to which girls they liked. It was never me, but that's about as far as I got to relate to anything that happened at confirmation. But he knew that I hadn't done the assignment, and he said, "I gave you all a word, and Marcia Levy, I would like you to stand up and tell us what extensive studying you have done regarding this word." Well, I was not an intellectual, to put it mildly, and he said, "Tell me what the word," oh my goodness. What is the word when you talk about, oh yeah, when someone wants to be put to death? He said, "Tell me, Marcia Levy, what you feel about euthanasia." Oh my God, what is it? And I said, "Well, I guess they're no different than teenagers in any other country." But one of my last recollections was when my husband Gordon and I had gotten married by Rabbi Baskin, and we went to services. There was my father, my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, and my husband Gordon, myself. And the rabbi said in his sermon, "I feel as I look through our congregation and include myself that we are all guilty of the sin of xenophobia." And I thought, thank God it's not the confirmation class. He asked me what I thought. But my father said to my mother, "What's xenophobia?" My mother turned to me and said, "What's xenophobia?" I turned to my mother-in-law, went down to my husband, who turned to his father and said, "What's xenophobia?" So everybody whispered it along, and I said to Gordon, "What is xenophobia? What's he talking about?" And he said, "Well, my dad says it's the fear of backing into doorknobs." We were not in this country. But one of my last visits when he was still living here was at Fortino's, and he had a lovely lady. Now you'd have to fill me in. Her first name was Catherine, and she looked after the rabbi. I don't remember her last name. That's right. And he saw me, and he didn't speak to me by name, and he said, "How are you?" He said, "I have to say, given your early start in our Sunday school, and you're singing with Leonore Lebo that I do not remember with fondness, and also your actions in the confirmation class, I did not have a lot of hopes for your future. I'm so pleased to say that you have enjoyed a tremendous amount of success from what I hear, and are very, very successful in your chosen profession. And I said, oh, thank you, Rabbi. And he turned to this lady and he said, Catherine, this woman was a member of our temple and still is, and she is probably the most successful real estate agent in Hamilton. And the lady looked at me and said, oh, I'm so pleased to meet you. I've heard all about you. You must be Judy Catherine. Thank you very much.
So, hi, my name is Mark Vivian. There was an event. I was many thoughts about the rabbi, and they were touched on by Dana and the librarian in that. My speech, if you notice, I've already said 3 A's. The 2 speakers earlier tonight, not one. If you think about it, your speech was brilliant, and so was Dana's, because he just spoke. And I remember, I think it may have been the rabbi's. It was at I think it was Leuna. It was one of the celebrations, and there was the rabbi, Lincoln Alexander, and the gentleman doing what you did, Marcia. I'm losing the words, but the guy who's now the Canadian ambassador to the United Nations, Bob Ray. The 3 most brilliant speakers, they all spoke in one thing, and not one interruption. Baskin, Link, and Bob Ray, brilliant speakers. Just when I think of Rabbi Baskin, I think of an orator. We thought that Hinda and I actually, come on up here, Hinda, please. She doesn't know we're doing this, so I'm going to get into trouble. We thought that the Baskins would be here tonight, so we actually prepared a letter to give to them. So, but I'm told that they're somewhere on the video or on the virtual. So I feel somewhat, after your speech and Dana's, like this is just so erudite and so warm and so precise. Ours is just kind of, I don't know, but I think it illustrates for all the congregants, every one of us has had some moments with the rabbi, and I think our letter to the Baskins illustrates it. So you want to start, or do you want me to? Okay. Dear David, Susan, and Judith, we met Rabbi Baskin soon after returning to Hamilton in 1981. We became members of the temple. That was the beginning of a 40-plus year relationship with the rabbi. Our bond with him grew with his involvement in our life cycle events.
When Orrin was born in 1984, there wasn't the mohel in Hamilton, so a pediatrician performed the circumcision and Rabbi Baskin officiated. In the fall of 2009, we informed the rabbi that our daughter Yemi was engaged to be married the following summer. The rabbi asked to meet with the couple upon his return from Florida. The wedding was not a traditional Jewish wedding. It was conducted by friends who led the ceremony in a Jewish style. Though he was a guest, near the end of the ceremony, Rabbi Baskin came under the chuppah and gave Yemina and Adam the priestly blessing. Mark and I were so moved by this wonderful, kind gesture. It meant a lot to us.
Whenever I encountered the rabbi, he inquired about my research. He inquired about my research. He thanked me for the work I was doing to better the lives of patients with cancer. It made me feel that what I was doing was very important, and that was a theme from both the speakers tonight. When in June 2016, when it was announced that I had been appointed a member of the Order of Canada, the rabbi was the first person to call to congratulate me. I became involved in the care of Marjorie during the palliative phase of her disease. During this time, I had a number of conversations with the rabbi, and I was honored to be able to offer support to him, a reversed role from what we heard earlier. I recall at her Shiva, he came over to me, put his head on my shoulder, and wept as I hugged him. When Hinda and I visited him at the Russell Hill, while I was the president of Temple Anshe Sholom, the rabbi was interested and up to date on what was happening at the temple. He had advice and strong opinions, very strong opinions, on how to solve the problems. They were so strong that I couldn't get a word in. It was astounding how passionate he was about the well-being of the temple. Over the years, our warm feelings and respect for Rabbi Baskin grew into an enduring love for a wonderful human being. And so we will mail this to David and family.
My name is Carl Loa, and I have a little anecdote that I could share with you at this time. And I kind of forget this exact circumstances that it was under, but the rabbi was talking, and the subject was Cantor Thalheimer. The two of them worked together for many, many years. So this is Rabbi Baskin telling the story. And it was a regular Friday night service, and they were running a little late. A little long. And Rabbi Baskin, from his side of the bima, shuffles over to Cantor Thalheimer and says to him, we're running a little late here. Do you think you could cut out a couple of songs? To which Cantor Thalheimer turns to the rabbi and says, well, maybe you could cut out a couple of paragraphs out of your sermon. The fact that Rabbi Baskin told the story and laughed along with all of us, it just said a lot about the rabbi.
I'm Dave Lawson. I was working on some fundraiser, and in the afternoon, I was there ahead of time of the event, about 2 or 3 hours before it was going to start. I knew the rabbi was going to be speaking, and who comes through the door? You know, we're still setting up with Rabbi Baskin. Now, Rabbi Baskin has given hundreds and hundreds of speeches. But he went over and he checked that microphone. He wanted to make sure that everything was going to be in perfect order. He was just a consummate professional.
Vivian Baskin, for the last 5.5 years, Rabbi Baskin and I became good friends. And it actually started right in this room. It was at one of his book talks, and once I moved to Hamilton 8 years ago, I started to attend. And he takes me by the hand and we sat in a chair over there. And there were a number of people next to us. And he asked me out for lunch. And I could see all these expectant faces behind him because, of course, his voice carried very significantly. And I looked at him. I was turning 70 then, and I think he was 97 at the time. And I said to him, I have to think about this. We're at very different ages and stages. And I don't know how that deflated him, but I was in shock. So the next week, the next book group, he comes over and puts his arm around me. He said, well, have you thought? And I said, yes, I have, but I have to tell some other thing. And we went out for lunch, but he remembers it as coffee, which always reminded me of a Broadway song about a couple remembering things quite differently from one another. So we started early, but I was involved with a Syrian, I might cry, but you would understand. I was involved with the sponsorship of a newcomer family, you should say. And I invited him to come. We had a party at my house with a family and your extended family that was already here. And everyone in that room came over to me and told me an anecdote. And the one that stayed with me is that one of the churches in the area lost their minister or priest. I wasn't sure of the denomination. And he came and gave the sermon every Sunday, which I thought was so remarkable. And he was loved by the greater community. And I had gotten us tickets for the No More Anti-Semitism conference, and we both were eager to hear Erwin Kotler. And he was too much declined by that point to go. But I went and I took some notes and I sent him the notes, and so he could get a sense of the speakers that I had heard. And I think what he did in the greater community with his outreach, I don't think we would have such a deep problem with anti-Semitism because he was so well loved. And reaching out to the broader community was one of his special gifts to all of us, besides the personal gift to me. And it was a very sweet 5.5 years. Thank you.
It's hard to look at those pictures of the funeral. Yeah, I think there's just something about Rabbi Baskin's presence. I think we all felt like he was going to be there for it. Just, it's hard to believe. I had the privilege of sort of working with him as Rabbi Emeritus for 16 years. We would often go to lunch together. He had a lot of lunches. But the amazing thing was, and this is just what I wanted to mention, the amazing thing was he always surprised me. I mean, even after many, many years, he still had the ability to surprise me. And I was reminded by one of the pictures that came up earlier. Every year he would give a couple presentations at Breakfast Club. The Breakfast Club is a program that's been going on, I think, for about 70 years now. So every year he would give a couple presentations, and they were always the most widely attended sessions. And he always gave some wonderful scholarly discourse about one topic or another. So the last time that he spoke in person at Breakfast Club, after we moved to Toronto, he gave a couple, and we moved online during the pandemic, he gave a couple presentations online. But the last in-person presentation he gave, I always asked him what the topic was going to be. He usually waited until the last minute to let me know. So sometimes we had to plug in very vague titles into the promotions. And so this year he said, I'm going to talk about Jewish humor. So it's fine. Rabbi Baskin, presenting on Jewish humor. And I guess we all thought he was going to give a scholarly presentation about Jewish humor. This room was filled. He came dressed remarkably casual for himself. And he proceeded to give a 45-minute stand-up comedy routine, which had everybody in the room on the floor laughing in hysterics. Of course, his timing was perfect. And I think part of what was so remarkably funny was not just the jokes and the way he told them, but it was just a side of himself that, a lot of people talked about his wit and his humor, but to see him stand up and just give this performance, tell these jokes, I think was just a side of him. And, he had mentioned, often we talk about different things that are going on in the Jewish world or whatever. And he would say to me in his 90s, if I was doing it now, I'd do it different. I wish I had known then what I knew now. And he really was remarkably progressive. I mean, he officiated at his first same-sex wedding. He officiated in his 90s. And the fact that, this is something obviously he would not have done earlier in his rabbinate, but at this point in time, he just knew it was the right thing. So I think the fact that he could continually reveal new sides of himself to us was really something that was a remarkable part of his personality. Anybody else?
At the funeral, I had spoken to Paula already because the Shiva was in Toronto. I was concerned that we as a community needed to find, after the funeral, a way to sit Shiva. So basically, that's what we've done this evening. And I thought that, I thank both of you, and Rabbi particularly, who had a driving trip to come back to this, to give us a chance as a community to share our respect, our love, and everything that he meant to us as a rabbi. And it's a closure that we needed as a community, either here or online, and I think that's very important. So thank you so much for doing this and creating an evening that was so special for all of us. And that's something we could do, isn't it?
If no one else has anything they wanted to share, I just wanted to thank everybody. Aileen, your words just now are so important. I mean, and you know, it's closure, but it's not closure, because you know, 11 months from now, we're going to be observing the first Yartzeit. We'll commemorate that as well. And you know, it was interesting. Some of the one of the TV stations, after his passing, before the funeral, they came down here and did some footage which they used in the report. And one of the comments was about how what a presence he maintains within this building. You know, our Rabbi Bernard Baskin sanctuary, the bust in the library, and the portrait by the door, and they will stay. They will stay. And he will stay. And I cannot look at that bust in the library when he used to come in on Shabbat morning for Torah study. He'd come in with his cap on, and he would take his cap off, and he would put it on the head of the bust. And so, okay, nobody else can do that, but he can do that. And you know, it's those moments, it's those gestures, those Baskinisms that will stay with all of us. And his presence, you know, this is the house that Baskin built. I mean, he came to Hamilton, went to the old York Street building, and said to the then president, like 2 days later, "This will not do." And within a couple of years, they had moved out of that building and built this one. And you know, the pictures that we see of him with the leadership and his father here at the groundbreaking, and then the dedication of the building, and then 10 years later, the dedication of the new section. I mean, this is the house that Baskin built, and he will remain always as a presence here as long as we remain here, God willing, for a very, very long time. So we will take each of those points as they come. Friends, thank you for being. Oh, Mark, did you want to add?
It was a very nasty time because the hospitals were fighting about which one was going to close. Was it going to be the Henderson? Was it going to be St. Joe's? Was it going to be the medical center? And people's worst came out. They tried to organize a group that would be nonpartisan in trying to sort it out. Because the group that the city had chosen, or the leader, he was an ex-football player, nice guy, but you know, not, and everybody said, you know, if we needed somebody who would be seen by everyone as nonpartisan, fair player, respected, and it was Rabbi Baskin. And it was, we're talking now about St. Joe's, the Catholic hospital, the Hamilton Civics, McMaster, and I think behind the scenes, Bernie was involved with the local politicians and ultimately nothing was really closed. We were one of the few places that, but I do believe he had something to do with the province backing off and closing one of our facilities. And he was held in such respect by everyone, no matter whether you're Jewish, Catholic, and whatnot. So that's an anecdote that I recall.
Zecher Tzadik Livracha, may the memory of Rabbi Baskin continue to be for all of us as an abiding blessing. I want to thank everybody who helped organize this evening. I want to thank Paula and Joe for taking such good care of us. Thank you both. Cantor Baruch for all of her organization of this evening, and our speakers and participants, and we wish everybody a good evening.